Think we're ready to get started. Welcome to another 10x Homeschool Q&A. Kicking it off with some fall question. Um, these all kind of correlate with where we're at in the school year. So the first one is, can my kids, if I'm homeschooling, can they participate in extracurricular activities? So like dances, sports. I think we just had homecoming. Last week I saw a bunch of kids going to homecoming. So can they do it? And are there any, I guess, restrictions or requirements or special hoops they have to jump through to do any of that kind of stuff?
So that depends on the state you live in as far as classes go. Sports, classes this year, we need to put one of my sons in driver's ed. We're debating if we're going to do private lessons or go the school route because his schedule's pretty full. But our state, Utah, you can do that. And you usually have to go into the office and sign the child up. Sometimes, if it's a sport that's after school, they just let the coach know. And the coach, they might have to fill out a physical or something, but they're not exactly registered with the school. But that's going to depend on every state. When we lived in Virginia, our children were not allowed to participate in any extracurricular activities because that was just the state law. So I would refer you to hslda.org again. That has all the information about what your state allows. Now, as far as homecoming and other things like that, I mean, do you want to answer that?
Well, I know that I went to dances along with, my siblings. And yeah, I mean, you just buy a ticket or ask one of your public school friends to buy a ticket for you, pay them back, did that, and just
Yep.
you have a ticket, you get in. So
Yep.
there's no reason not to have a social life just because you're homeschooled. So,
Yeah.
which I know is a big misconception about homeschooling, but if you're an introverted person, don't use it as an excuse not to have a social life. You can get out there and you just got to put yourself out there a little bit more, but you can definitely participate in a lot of those things. So if, let's say there's some extracurricular activity, sport or theater or something along those lines, and I live in a state where my school, the state laws prevent me from participating in the public school activities. Are there groups or private, associations that host those kinds of things so that my kid can still pursue that talent or that interest, or what's the deal there?
Yes. Absolutely. There are so many groups that you honestly, if you did everything that's offered out there, you'd be busier than you want to be. So, for example, my son this year, my 15-year-old, wanted to join the school choir, the boys' choir at school. And he did. And it took about 2 hours with driving there and back. We finally decided it wasn't worth his time because he wanted to pursue um, starting a mountain biking business. And so he's going to spend his time doing that instead. But then he was also taking voice lessons and guitar through a private teacher. There are lots of homeschool groups out there. And the nice thing is that if there isn't one and you're the mom and your child wants to do it, you can create it and invite other people. There are so many homeschool groups online you can reach out to. Sometimes you can even get tutors that are online. We're looking for an online trumpet teacher for one of my sons right now. He's not sure if he wants to do it online, but we're going to do a free trial lesson this week. And so there are just so many options out there. And another funny thing is my 15-year-old over the weekend, he's on the mountain bike team for high school, which, because he's your brother, but the team doesn't meet during the school hours. So it's considered like a side team. And that might be something in other states you might be allowed to do. That's not, if your child isn't registered in the school, but maybe it's something like a lot of schools have hockey teams, ice hockey teams, or mountain bike teams that aren't, they're coordinated with the school, but they're not actually part of school. So you might be allowed to participate in that. So check on that. But he knows a lot of people from the mountain bike team, and then he's been in homeschool groups, and he gets invited to a lot of things. I'm pretty shocked. He might be the most social out of all of you, which which is like really surprising. But every time he's at a hangout with these friends from school, they all are in shock about how many people he knows, because his friend group is so big between homeschool, church, and the public school stuff he does do, that everybody's just shocked, like, how do you know all these people? So there's something out there for everybody. It's just a question of, do you want to do it all?
Yeah. And he's learning how to network like for
Yeah.
real, like the way you have to network professionally.
Yes.
He's not forced into these relationships. He has to go out and build his own network. And so that's a valuable
Yep.
life skill that he has. But yeah, I mean, there's so much now too, like even from just 10, 15 years ago to
Yeah, there is.
today, there's so much right at your fingertips. And like you said, if it doesn't exist, you can create it. Like you couldn't have a more customizable option for your child
Right.
than homeschool. And
Yeah.
it's all up to you and your kid and their interests. And so I guess kind of along those lines, what when it comes to my kid and their interests versus kind of the status quo and the expectation for subjects and subject matter, what would you say based on your experience with the seven of us, if a parent's having to choose, what are the most important subjects and topics to include in their children's education? Because you get down rabbit holes when you're kind of turned on your own. Like,
Yes.
you can really get way into whatever it is that you're interested in that moment. And so as a parent, like what are the things that you say, okay, that's great, that's fine, but you have to at least be studying this, and this. Like, what are those?
Yeah. That is such a good question. And I can only share my perspective, and also knowing our why. Again, this goes back to your why. One of our big whys over the years has always been just to make sure that our children are profitable servants, if you will, good citizens, believe in God, can function, can love learning, can basically do anything because they love learning. I wasn't, I think at first I was very worried about the subjects we were teaching and how thorough we were teaching them, and which ones to go all the way in and which ones to hold back on. And now that I've done it as long as I have, I'm a lot less worried about that and more worried about, do they know where to go to learn? Do they have passions? Are they doing research in the areas of their passion? But of course, we have life skills that we need. And I would say that a lot of the kids that have gone off to college have found that they had roommates that maybe could perform academically, but even then I can remember most of the kids that went to college came home and said their peers were very overwhelmed with the workload. And in addition to that, couldn't cook their own meals, didn't
Yeah.
know how to do their laundry, didn't know how to budget. I mean, just really didn't have some basic life skills. So, and again, it's interesting. We all grow up, and I think probably one of the most important things we do on a daily basis is have interactions and relationships with people, whether we become spouses or parents, and we don't sit and take time to learn about those topics. So I can't say that there's necessarily subjects that trump other subjects, but you want to know your why. And this is kind of interesting because, again, the 15-year-old son that he loves everything. He literally loves to learn everything. He loves art, acrylic art to be specific. He loves singing. He wants to learn the guitar. He loves mountain biking. He loves geometry. He wants to be an engineer. He loves studying history. He loves to read. Like, he really loves everything. And so our schedule this year, when it started out, we were trying to kind of fit it all in so that primarily so that he could decide, okay, you can't actually do everything. So, which things are you feeling more drawn toward once you start them? Praying about it. What are you feeling like the Lord wants you to do with your time? Because our time is a gift. And so it's taken a few weeks. We're already what? How many weeks into the school year? Roughly a month into the school year. And he did decide that although he loves singing and he loves choir with the boys at the high school, that wasn't worth 6 hours of his time every week when he knows for sure he wants to pursue becoming a mechanical engineer. And so he wants to put a lot more time into math and sciences and starting a business and hopefully getting sponsored. So that doesn't necessarily answer your question, but it was a real experience that we just had, which was that we can't get into everything. And so there are going to be times you want to meet your child where they're at with their passion and go with it, because I mean, you never know, that might lead to their future career. And then there are times where, so for example, we haven't spent a lot of quality time on writing, and my boys would prefer not to. That is one subject that boy is not interested in, and I would say probably boys in general. um, but I have been thinking a lot about it and realized, they're pretty articulate. We have discussions regularly, and I know that if they could articulate onto paper, they'd probably be pretty decent writers. But there are some writing things that we're going to be addressing this year, because that's an important skill to learn how to communicate with people, whether it's by mouth or by pen. So that's something that I've decided is going to trump a couple of things this year. So that
Yeah,
helps.
so okay, what I'm hearing is you have a scenario where you have a super well-rounded kid that's interested in a lot of things. And I love what you're saying about kind of letting them run with their interests and skill, especially as their interests relate to life skills. Like I know
Mm-hmm.
Father Matthew is very into 3D printing. That's a really cool, fun thing to be into. But the byproduct of that is, he's learning coding and a whole bunch of other actually valuable computer skills. And there's math involved and
Yeah.
geometry. So like it's awesome when you can take an interest, tie it to a skill, and diving into that skill, you cover a whole array of different subjects, right?
Yeah.
But um what and then you're kind of just filling in the gaps like with the writing thing as you see them. But what do you do with a kid that's maybe not as well rounded? So and you've had seven, so I'm sure among us you've
Yes.
maybe that's me, I don't know, but you've got, maybe a kid that's a little bit less broad in his interests and wants to take a deep dive into something that's not super practical.
Like
And
salary.
yeah, just maybe something like that. And so what do you do with that child as far as, backfilling their needs? Because there's a lot more, there would be a lot more gaps in that child's education if he were left to himself.
Right, right. And that is true. And so, yeah. And it's interesting because I joke about falconry because it is certainly not practical. And yet, I think since the time you started studying that, I'm constantly scouring the skies when I'm out in nature. Is that a
Yeah.
falcon? Is that a hawk? And so it still creates a passion and a love for things. But yeah, how are you going to use that every day? And some people could argue that I don't think we have enough people studying nature, and we've become a very robotic society. And so it can be a very practical skill. But
I
yes, as
thought
far as
I was gonna be the Crap Brothers with Chad
you
for a
did,
while there. I really
you,
did. I thought it
you
was
did.
gonna happen.
And honestly, if you wanted to, you probably could have. You just decided to take a different route.
There's some biology there. Like there are some. branches off of that that are somewhat educational, but yeah, it's not super practical. I'll give you that.
Yeah, yeah. So what is there's some idiom or some quote about if you don't have the artists and the musicians and the nature lovers, then you have nothing to write or read about.
Yeah.
So you have to have it all, right? But um, yeah, that's interesting because obviously Jacob, the next child, hasn't developed a taste for as many different subjects yet. And so with that, I certainly take more of a lead. And it's kind of like a buffet. You just keep offering, you keep giving the offerings, and you kind of base it off of what you're interested in. And at some point, something you read or some game you play or some fact that they hear will spark an interest. And then as soon as you see that little interest, especially from that child that's less inclined to pursue on their own, you snap it up and you can get a little carried away and go
Hmm.
check out every book at the library on rocks and buy a bunch of geodes and go on a geode field trip. And but sometimes that's what they need, is just like a little push, kind of like when someone starts to read a book and maybe they're not into it the first chapter, but they keep going, and then they catch on. So you just keep giving different offerings, and in different subjects and different areas, and not necessarily every single day, but something is going to draw their attention. And then just ask them lots of questions. Well, what was interesting to you when we read this? Why was it boring if they think it's boring? Or um, what do you wish you could do? Or what do you notice about the character? Or just try to find ways to relate it to them and to their experience. And eventually, they might not love everything like the other kid that loves everything. But even if they find a passion for a few things and can still learn skills they need in a fun and enjoyable way so that they still stick, they're they're going to find something to be passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That the analogy of the buffet is a good one, actually. I think that you can not everybody has the palate, a refined palate at that age, right? Like you think about
Mhm.
people that actually really enjoy buffets. I can remember begging to go to buffets all the time as a kid, and
To go
now
where?
to buffets, Chakarama
Oh,
specifically,
yes,
because
yes, you
that's what
did.
was close. I loved it, right? Like I think we went there for my birthday a couple of times, and like now it's like probably like one of the last places I would want to go eat. But um, kids don't have refined palates yet, and it's the same
Yeah.
thing intellectually, right? Like you just
Yep.
that's a great analogy because you can watch them at the buffet, and when they start to make some more mature decisions, or you can see a little more variety, they're getting it. And I
Yeah.
think too, because I was thinking while you were talking about the difference between my two brothers, because I know them, and just the age difference, how much that has to do with the age difference, and can that desire for a broader spectrum of education or just the overall love of learning, can it be learned and taught? Obviously it can. That's You can learn to love learning.
Yeah.
That's a big huge part of what we're trying to do as homeschool
Right.
parents is instill that in our children. And that's part of how you do it, is you just keep offering it, and obviously you love it yourself, you be the example. The only thing I would add to the subject thing, um, is I think reading should just be a requirement at a certain age. Really at every age, but at some point it transitions from you reading to your kid to you got to have some reading time on your own.
Yeah.
And I I know there's some people who in their home they use reading as currency, you know,
Hmm.
and that's I think that's a good idea as long as it doesn't create a negative relationship to reading, but uh,
Yeah.
certainly following your child's passions and interests, broadening those as needed, and just making sure that reading's happening in the home. Um, you're gonna cover your bases.
Yeah.
There,
Because a lot is they don't know what they don't know. So how are they going to ask to study this or this or this, or how are they going to know if they're interested in it when they don't even know it exists, right? And that even goes for adults. As
Yeah.
far as if we're diving into homeschooling and we're new in homeschooling, and maybe you're lost with where to even begin, say with history, for example, right? Well, how would you go about studying history? Well, you don't know what you don't know about history. So just start reading, and something's going to pique your interest, and then you're going to go down a rabbit hole and another rabbit hole. And honestly, you could go down history rabbit holes your whole life and never
Yeah.
finish.
Well, that's one actually. I'm glad you brought it up because history is on like the list of subjects that from the academic world kind of gets deemed as less important, and it kind of gets put on the back burner. It's not even on, like the ACT, no history.
Yeah.
Like there's not like a lot of these standardized tests don't even include it. So I was going to ask you, how important is history, and how much emphasis should be placed on it? Because you basically just said that you don't necessarily place special emphasis on any of the subjects. So what importance does history hold for you as a subject, and where should it rank if you were to?
Well, I guess I have to correct myself. History is probably the one I prioritize the most, at least for myself, not necessarily always for my children. Um, I always do wish that when they are reading, I'm always wishing that their palate would refine a little bit more quickly, and that they would spend more time reading historical biographies or stories, because history for me in school was probably one of that and math were probably my least favorite subjects. And history was primarily my least favorite subject because we had a teacher that would sit up at the front of the class and say, okay, in 1861 to 1865, the Civil War happened. There was a North and a South, and the North won, and the South was wrong, and the end. Then Lincoln gets assassinated, and it just was this list of dates, and I just didn't understand how that related to anything. What I will say about history is it shocks me that they put it on the back burner. First of all, we're living history our whole lives. Everything we're surrounded by, whether we use technology, the way science has developed, structures, architecture, the way our school system's set up, there was an historical event that initiated how everything came about. And several years ago, I visited a Christian school, and I saw on the wall history, but with the emphasis on his story, his being Christ. And so the number one reason that I myself and I want my children to study history is, number one, to see God's hand in our lives, because it's there from the beginning, it's there now. And then, of course, to learn from the past, to learn about people's mistakes, to learn about people's successes. We have scientists that have built on the historical journals and documents written by previous scientists, to study human nature. Human nature really doesn't change. It's been the same from the beginning of time. We've tried to refine ourselves more, and we think that we're more well behaved, not as savage, and to a degree that's true, and then to a degree it's not true. It teaches empathy for the human condition. It teaches gratitude, reasons for why we have things or why we do things. It affects like why societies create certain manners and have their own cultures and music. Like there's so much that it's woven into. And so if you start studying history, that takes you down every rabbit hole you can think of. It takes you down the math rabbit hole and the science rabbit hole and the art and the music, and it covers everything. And so if we approach history from, okay, from 1861 to 1865, there was this war between the North and the South. Or if you approach it from telling it from the story perspective, there was once a battle fought. It was so great a battle, it lasted 5 years. It divided a nation. And they weren't just enemies. It divided families and friends who fought on different sides. And then you start to go into like, well, why would someone fight their own family? And and then you get into all the depth of there wasn't this, I don't know. Some of my kids will debate me on this about which side was right or wrong. We still debate this as a family. We debate President Abraham Lincoln, and if some of us agree with what he did, some of us don't. Some of us are divided on this topic of the Civil War. But I don't know that any of us can come to an actual answer because we weren't there. We don't know what actually these people were feeling or experiencing. We have the facts of today. It's said that the victors write history. So when you do study history, you want to do it, you want to be very cautious to choose sources that are accurate, which is very difficult to determine. But if you can go to anything that's original, any original sources, or find authors and writers that focus on doing their research off of anything original, that helps. And so I think I even maybe got on a little rabbit hole here, but there are so many ways to teach history, and it is by far my favorite subject. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can tell. But that's important. It was my favorite subject during my high school years, and it's all because of an awesome mentor and
Yeah.
someone who also loved it.
And it
And
wasn't me. It was another teacher.
it was a different teacher,
an
yeah.
online teacher, and he inspired me. It's great.
Hmm. He's awesome. But I guess my 2 cents on history, and then we'll wrap it up because I think we're getting towards the end of our time here. But there's a few compelling reasons to prioritize history. The the, the other subjects, the other core subjects, math, English, science, I think they're important. I think they're useful, uh, at least at an rudimentary level. You have to understand some of that just to function. But history, as you say, it does encompass so much, and it's actually, I think, some of the highest level reading. It's some of
Yeah.
the uh as far as critical thinking goes, reading comprehension, if you're using history to learn how to read and to write and to debate and think, like it can bleed into all of these other areas. So
Mhm. Yeah.
why not use it? You gave us a bunch of great reasons why, but if you're on the fence at all, why not? Because there's so much there, and it's just like a wasted opportunity not to use the the. Sorry, guys, sorry. My Zoom call is freaking out on me. Not to use the history of our nation, of our
Yeah.
country, in education, and to make sure that our children know that is important, especially with where the world is at today, and with the truth being so hard to find. Like, we don't, this is going to sound a little conspiracy theorist, but we don't know how long we'll have access to accurate history. Um, and so having physical copies of good books and studying from those, I think, is super important. But yeah, things are already being distorted. Information, we talked on a previous call, is a commodity in the sense that yes, history, there's a lot of names and dates and places, and you can go find those anytime, just like you can go find the answer to what's the square root of 5,012. But the reality is when you go and type in history question in chat GPT in 2 years, you don't
Yeah,
know where that answer is coming from. And so it needs to be handed down. That's how I feel about it. But I also think it's just enriching, and
yeah,
it's it's it instills a desire of a love of learning and a desire to be informed and
yeah,
to a love of your nation, which is something that I think we all need at this time. So
for sure. It's definitely eroding, and even if you were to look up some facts about history, when did this happen? When did that happen? Until you get into the stories and you have that context and you start seeing the relationships between all the events that are happening. Boys in the Boat has got to be one of my favorite historical accounts. That book is outstanding. The movie's blah. um, but wow, the amount of history you can learn just in that one book is phenomenal. And no searching on Google can make you feel what you're going to feel after you read a historical account. You just aren't going to feel the same way. And that's why I think we have people today that are arguing things they don't understand because they don't have the context and the story behind it. They're arguing something arbitrary and abstract that they can't wrap their mind around because, well, we weren't there. So the closest we can get to understanding why the founders did what they did, the way they did it, how they did it, what they read before they wrote you've got to immerse yourself in it, or you're never going to feel the 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 patriotism and the pride and the way you're supposed to, even if you just look up the facts about it. Can you tell I love history a little?
yeah, no, it's awesome.
That's good.
So there you have it, guys. We're coming into fall, so don't uh don't think that your kids have to miss out on all the extracurricular stuff. And
Yeah,
as far as the actual curriculum goes at home, uh, if you have a kid that is all in on learning tons of different topics, maybe you just gently guide that a little bit and fill in the gaps as necessary. But if you have a kid that hasn't quite got to that level yet, uh, try the buffet style a little bit. And the important distinction I think that you made, Mom, which is I'm gonna reiterate, is not something different every day, right?
right.
You're just giving them an assortment of exposure to different things. But
Yeah,
if we were
yeah.
going
There's even a term online, if anyone wants to look up. It's a different way of doing it. Some people want to be very hands-on with their introducing the information. If you have a child that's really reluctant, there's something called strewing that you can look up, and it's basically where moms will just set out different books, different activities, projects throughout the house that a child might just walk up to and think, oh, what's this? So you can look up strewing, and that's one way to do it. But and
and that
and
sounds
sorry,
like it might make sense for younger kids too, a little more.
yeah, because they can just walk right up, and all of a sudden, if they're just, oh, what's this? And don't say anything. Don't, oh, you're looking at a book, just watch them, and all of a sudden they're seeing a picture, they're whatever. The one other thing I was going to say about history is, don't overestimate how impactful a picture book can even be. It doesn't always have to be a novel, but these picture books, this one in particular, oh my goodness, can take you down. My teen boys still love this. I love this book. But again, be cautious, but picture books can be a great start even as an adult, because it just helps you kind of like know a little bit about it, and then all of a sudden you go, well, I want to know more about that event. Anyway,
We should
I'm
do a
done.
list. We should do a list of history books that aren't boring. Because
We
I think
should.
that's a very common, you know.
History is so not boring. Wow.
But
Yeah, who knew? Who knew salt was a
you
commodity?
you're not textbooks have that connotation and
Yes,
can be
because they're not living.
some
They're
daunting
not living
history ones. But
books.
there's also really good history books out there. So we'll try and put
Yeah,
it together for you guys.
yeah,
But if we had
yeah.
to emphasize any type of subject or curriculum, it would be read, and
Mhm.
try and read history.
Yep,
And that's it for today.
yep.
So thanks for tuning in. Those of you that did, if you're watching this recorded, you can still submit questions. Just comment in the chat on the community, or you can also leave a comment on the YouTube video. And thanks, Mom, and
Yep.
see you in the next one.
Happy learning. Bye.